Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. This scene happened when I was 21 years old. It's in a smaller town outside of a huge city in the Midwest. This was 1981, and I worked at a fast food and they stayed open until 3 a.m. My then husband worked for a bowling bowl alley as a manager, and he was never off before 2 a.m. I was expecting my first child and business was slow, so I was sent home about 1 a.m. In the town we lived in, there was a large private girls' college. Women were being warned to lock their car doors because 2 males were still on the loose that were targeting women around my age. They were sometimes following them home and attacking or forcing a woman alone late at night off the road. The men were raping and killing the women, and they had killed 3 women by this point. 2 of the women were found on deserted roads and 1 in her apartment. There was no description of these men or what kind of vehicle they drove. I left work and I climbed into my car. I locked my doors and I started for home. The hair on the back of my head stood up on the end, and my gut feeling told me that something was very wrong. I figured out that I was being followed home. I took several turns around town trying to shake this car, but to no avail. The advice given was that if you thought you were being followed is to drive to the police station. But we had just recently moved to this area, so I had no idea where the police station was. I was terrified. I panicked and I couldn't think what to do. This was in the days with no cell phones, but the payphones were made in different areas where you could drive up to them, sit in the driver's seat, put your window down, and the payphones had a longer cord to enable you to stay in your car and just talk. You still had to deposit money in order to talk, even when you're calling 911. I thought briefly about trying to get to one of these phones, but I was too scared and I didn't think that I could have a coin ready in time before these men could have the time to approach me. My parents lived about 4 streets over from where I lived, and I decided that the safest decision was to try to make it to my parents' house. I was still being followed when I got to my parents' house. There was a short block that you could go around, and I went around this block about 3 times, and every single time that I did, I honked the horn. You would have thought that laying on the horn would have discouraged these creeps from continuing, but it had no effect. If anything, they moved in closer behind me. I pulled into their driveway, and these creeps pulled right in behind me, turned their lights off, and I heard their doors open and shut. I was beyond terror at this point, and they were out of their car, one coming up on one side and one on the other. My parents' house was a split level, and you pulled up in front of a double-car garage. In order to get into the house, you had to go in through the garage door or the front door, and the front door was to the left of the driveway, about 2 car lengths away, plus a set of steps. I laid on the horn again, and they still kept coming. My dad, who is a retired military, oftentimes stayed up late at night watching TV. And thank God that he did this night. All of a sudden, he turned the porch light on and burst out the front door. He assessed the situation instantly and started yelling at these creeps to get the fuck away from my car while barreling down the steps towards them. At first, they didn't retreat very fast, but they must have thought better. My dad is very big-boned and about 6'4". He had a brother that played in college football and he wore a size 15 shoe. He made it to the front of their car and pounded on the hood of it before they were able to burn rubber, reversing out of the driveway. While he was unable to get a license number because they didn't have a front plate, he was able to describe them and gave a make and model to the police. The police told me how fortunate I was that my dad had realized what a dire situation I was in. I still get chills thinking back to that night, and I remember it as if it were yesterday. My dad said that he thought he heard a car honk more than once and that he heard me in the driveway. He had just shut off the TV and he was heading for bed when I pulled in. But thank God, my dad acted so quickly, or I might not be writing this today. This incident has caused me to be hyper aware of my surroundings, and I never turn into my driveway without making sure that I am not followed. Always be mindful of where you are, and don't walk around with your headphones on or phone pressed to your ear. You never know when you may be an opportunistic moment for someone with ill intentions. Know where your local police station is, and if you ever get chills that something is wrong, drive into the police station and the police are more than happy to help you out. It's really better safe than sorry. The police did capture these creeps about 2 weeks later, and they didn't get a fourth victim. They were both on probation for kidnapping and rape and served their time and decided killing their victims left no witnesses. My dad is still my hero today because his quick actions prevented me from being the fourth victim. And the color, model, and make of the car that my dad described was the description of what they were driving when they were arrested. This just happened to me an hour ago as I'm driving back home from work. As I'm at an intersection not too far from my house, there was a car from the opposite side of the road turning into where I'm going, and then we almost hit each other. We both stopped on time, and it was really no biggie. But the guy in the car is noticeably yelling at me from inside his car, giving me the middle finger. Well, alright, I just let him go ahead, and I thought that that would be the end of the road rage for tonight. But oh boy was I wrong. Immediately after I let the guy through, behind him was a car turning very fast, so I accelerated and I quickly got in front of him. Not out of ego or anything. I just thought that considering the position of my car in the turning lane, it's likely that this dumbass would hit me. But right afterwards, this guy is obviously pissed off and he starts flickering his extremely bright lights at me for a minute straight. It was annoying as hell, considering something brighter than the goddamn sun is shining at me for a minute, and you can tell that it's really hard to navigate at night like that. So I said to myself, well, two can play at this game, asshole. And I slowed down to 20 miles an hour from 50 for a minute or so. Still flicking his lights, but not as much at this point. At this point, I was close to home and I turned into my subdivision, thinking that this whole saga would end then and there. But holy shit, this guy follows me into my maze of a neighborhood, and I get near my house and he's still following me. I freaked the hell out and I was wondering, should I just park in my driveway and he will go away? Or maybe should I just go into a random neighborhood and then lose him there? So as soon as I passed my house, I decided to go right past it and into another neighborhood a couple of minutes away. And he follows me exactly to there. At this point, I left that neighborhood and I just freaking jumped on my gas pedal and I sped down the road and made a random right turn. At this point, this guy is still following me, but it's a red light for him, so thankfully he stops and after that he lost me. Honestly, this was a scary experience for me, considering that my suburb isn't too far from very dangerous hoods where gunshots can be heard often. Who knows that if I would have stopped my car at home, maybe this guy would have got a gun out and then shoot at me. It's just really creepy how this road rage asshole easily followed me to my house in an obvious attempt to scare me. Warning: allusions to suicide, death threats, harming language. Do not listen if this could upset you. Well, I've recently found this subreddit and I decided that I would share a story to you all. This happened back in 2019 to 2021 and it still sticks with me today. I will be using fake names for myself and the man that I'm talking about, Mary for me and Dennis for him. When I was 13, I met someone on Discord. He was funny, smart, and exactly my type. He was also 16. I don't know my logic with that being okay at 13, but I was stupid and naive. We became close friends, and after about 3 months of knowing him, I told him that I had feelings for him. We then ended up dating. We lived across country from each other, and we were basically just friends, but whatever. So, as we are dating, he starts basically grooming me. As a kid who was always on the internet and was exposed to Kik, I was used to this behavior and I thought that it was fine. He had me send nude photos, gross messages, and pretty much worship him. I wasn't allowed to talk to people on Discord without him there and stuff like that. He told me that he would kill himself if I ever left him, or how he was always on drugs because he was so sad. He also was incredibly racist and thought Nazi jokes were okay. And I'm so mad at myself for not realizing that it wasn't okay back then. He ends up cheating on me with his ex, and then he tossed me out the door. He doesn't talk to me anymore and says we shouldn't talk anymore because we aren't together. But here's where it gets bad. And note that this happened over 5 years ago and I have a spotty memory of this time. New accounts pop up in the server that we met on. It was a server of mutual friends, and those accounts start saying horrible things about me, saying Mary is a fat whale, Mary is a N-word, and more things of that sort. The accounts have names like Jerry Touches Kids or Big Fat Whale and etc. I had gotten in trouble with the server owners because it was my fault that people were saying these things, like I had told them to spam things about me or something. The accounts also started messaging me to kill myself, to die, how I'm a whale, a whore, and more. I just ended up blocking every account and I move on with my life. Great, it was over with, right? Or so I thought it was. Fast forward a year to late summer of 2019, and everything starts up again. The messages, him telling people lies and rumors, and also direct threats. I was sent unsolicited porn, death threats, slurs, and that I should kill myself because no one cares about me. And at that time, I had undiagnosed depression and anxiety, and I almost did kill myself. I went to therapy and I tried to get over it. In 2020, right when the quarantine happened, I got a boyfriend. I was super happy and I came back out of my shell. He and I would play games on Discord together and I joined more servers. But around 2 months later, I got another message. Someone had messaged me named Lily, I believe. It was a normal profile, and we were in a server together, so I really thought nothing of it. She had then messaged me how I was, and I had never talked to her before, so I was kind of confused. She said we had a long conversation about mental health the day before, so she wanted to make sure that I was alright. I asked who she was and what she was talking about, and she said something like, "Oh, you told me about this. You said you take medicine for schizophrenia and must have missed the dose. Are you off your meds?" I was extremely confused and scared because I had never talked to this person and I certainly didn't have schizophrenia. After about 10 minutes of this charade, I realized that it was Dennis. I blocked the account and I didn't accept new friend request. The next day, I got hundreds of messages with the same contents that I previously mentioned, the threats, porn, etc., and I was so terrified that I asked my boyfriend for help. He told me to make a new account and not friend any other mutual friends so he couldn't find me. I did what he suggested, which caused an affiliated Twitch account that I had spent years building. I changed all my accounts, deleted most, and I made new ones. The messages found me again. I have no idea how. These new accounts weren't tied to me. I got fed up and I had asked a mutual friend that I thought that I could trust some personal information about Dennis to go to the police and get a possible restraining order or something. And I didn't totally know how the police handled these issues. Months go by and nothing. Well, until the fall of 2021, in which Dennis messages me again, calling me a stupid bitch, and how he will always find me, and how I'm so fat and dumb and that no one loves me. And I isolated myself and deleted more accounts. I never was able to go to the police because I had no information, like his full name or address. It's been 2 years, and every day I worry if he lives near me, if he knows where I live or where I go to school. I recently found out that he had a website and made YouTube videos. He has made YouTube videos referencing me. His copyright claim is something like Mary the Fat Whale Inc. I can't find it anymore, so I put the closest to what I remembered. It was hell, and I'm still worried every single day that he will find me. I believe he has a Reddit account and could find this. And I hope that we don't meet again, Dennis. I wish you the worst. Short backstory. This happened almost a year ago. I'm a 19-year-old female, and I lived in a small town in Australia. I always take my 13-year-old Jack Russell mix for a short 20-minute walk down the road at about 7 to 7:30 p.m. On this night, I had to take him at about 8 to 8:30 p.m. as I had to work late. The sun was just setting to the point where I can see, but not too well. That could have just been my poor eyesight, but it was enough to manage without needing a flashlight. Although I did have one on me, I just didn't want to use it. We had just made our loop around a small community garden, and as I was leaving the gate, I looked to my right, and I saw a person in all black heading towards me. I was also wearing all black, so we both looked pretty suspicious. But out of panic, I crossed the road and I headed left. They did the same not 1 second later. I'm a naturally fast walker, but I made myself go faster. All I had to do was cross the road one more time and then turn right, go down a few houses, and then I'm home. So I'm walking faster, but not enough to where it was obvious. I crossed the road and I turned right, and this person didn't cross the road, but he turned right and stayed on the other side of the road. We were about parallel on the street, and I knew that if they crossed the road, I could run, and I wasn't too far from home. When I got into my yard, the person stopped across the road, and at this point, I realized that the door was locked and I didn't have a key. The person stayed across the road as I rang the bell. I was pounding on the door, and my older brother answered, and the person had just made it into our yard. My brother told this person to F off, and he walked back the way we came. My brother asked who it was, and I explained everything to him. From this day, I take my dog for a walk before work, early in the morning, rather than after work at night. I do enjoy sunset walks, but for my safety, I stop them, even after a year. In June of this year, I moved out of my parents' apartment as I finally got a steady job and longed for some sort of freedom. I looked for apartments that were affordable in my city, and I found one that's a 2 or 3 minute walk from my parents' apartment. To me, it was perfect. I'd get to live alone, and my parents would still be nearby, so I could visit them whenever I wanted or pop in to have breakfast with them. The apartment itself is great. It's not really much to look at, but for a single male, it's more than enough. My apartment has a long corridor connecting each room together from the sides. With my front door being at the start of the corridor, my bedroom is the second room on the left, but since the walls are pretty thin, you can literally hear people in the apartment complex walking, talking, and etc. from my bedroom, and for any room for that matter. Last week, I came home from the pub after meeting up with a few friends. It wasn't really late, around 10:15 or 10:30-ish, and I had the day off, so I took a shower and I hopped into the bed to watch Netflix. It was probably around midnight when I heard a faint knocking coming from the front door. I stopped the show that I was watching and listened for a minute or so, and just thought that it was my mind playing tricks on me. I continued watching Netflix when once again, I heard a 2-motion knock on my door. I sat up from bed, went to the door, and looked through the peephole. And sure enough, it was pitch black, so I once again shrugged it off and went back to my room. But before I could even sit down properly, I heard a slightly louder knock. At this point, I thought it was my friends playing a prank on me, so I called my friend and asked if he was knocking on my door and if he thought that it was amusing. He paused for a second and said, "Dude, I'm at home. I have to be up at 7:30. And I believed him, and I hung up the phone. I was talking pretty loudly, so whoever was knocking probably heard me, and as soon as I hung up, I heard another knock. At this point, I was pretty pissed off, so I walked to the door, looked through the peephole, and I saw nothing. I then unlocked the door, took a peek, and closed the door and locked it. Me, being angry and a bit intoxicated, I decided to wait and catch whoever was knocking. So I spent a solid 10 minutes silently looking through the peephole before being a bit startled as someone put their hand over the peephole and knocked again. I immediately started unlocking the door and I ran out to the apartment hall and I heard someone booking it down the steps. And I heard him lean against the wall as his jacket shrugged the wall. So I ran a few steps down before realizing that whoever this is was waiting behind the corner to get the jump on me. I hurried back inside and I then called the cops, and they were there within a few minutes and then scanned the building and the street, but couldn't find anyone. They told me that it could just be some kids pulling a prank and to never run after someone. They kept a patrol car around the entire night and the knocking stopped. It could have been some kids being dumb, but the part that gave me the creeps was the fact that whoever it was that ran down the stairs and stopped behind the corner, he didn't keep running. If it were some pranksters, I find it more likely that they would have just booked it outside. As I said, it's been a week and the knocking stopped. It kept me on edge for a few days because I just expected to be jumped by someone while walking into my apartment. But so far, nothing has come of it. I've let it go at the moment, and I just hope that it won't happen again. It was in 2018, back when I lived in the suburbs of Paris. I've been playing Pokemon Go since its release, and I used to go out at night to play, always with my best friend on a voice call. It was a night like any other, following my usual route. It was around 2 a.m. and I had already covered a good 2 kilometers, and I found myself about 1 kilometer away from home. I was standing near a Pokestop, catching what I could while talking to my friend, just like every night. It was a residential street with a few streetlights, but it was quite dark as there was a field just behind it. After about 5 minutes, I noticed a man in his 30s on the opposite sidewalk. He was just a few meters away from me, and he was holding Hedge Shears in his hand, and there were a pile of branches at his feet. I thought the man was just trimming the branches of his tree. However, when I described the scene to my friend, he said, "You should leave right away. No one does gardening in the middle of the night." But despite my friend's warning, I was so focused on Pokemon Go that I wanted to capture all the Pokemon before leaving. So I stayed, but while keeping an eye on the man's actions. As I looked at the man, I realized that he wasn't cutting any branches. He was only staring at me. He would occasionally move and hide behind a parked van nearby while spying on me through the windows. However, he knew very well that I could see him, and I began to feel scared. Despite my friends pleading for me to leave, I still hadn't caught all the Pokemon, so I hesitated to go. The man continued his strange behavior, crossing over to my side of the street and hiding behind some bushes while staring at me. Then, he went back to his pile of branches and stared at me again. Finally, I had enough. I decided to leave. I walked normally towards my home, trying not to show any fear. I had a straight path back home, and my friend on the call asked me to check behind me in case the man was following me. And indeed, he was, still holding the Hedge Shears about 10 meters behind me. I then made a left turn instead of going straight, even though it made my way longer. I wanted to be sure that he was following me and that it wasn't just a coincidence. And yes, he continued to follow me. I picked up my pace, taking snaps just in case something happened. And when I reached the end of the street, I was out of breath, but I was safe. There was no one behind me, and I entered my home feeling relieved. Suddenly, a white car pulled up right in front, stopped, and the driver's window rolled down. It was the man with the pruning shears. Now, he knew where I lived. I rushed inside. I locked everything. I grabbed a kitchen knife and I waited until someone woke up so that I could go to bed. There were no further incidents, and nobody believed me, so we checked the surveillance cameras at home, and unfortunately, I was right. When I was 18 and newly graduated, I ran into some issues with my attempts to enroll in college. I also had a hard time finding a job in my area in the meantime, which led me having to sign on at the job center. They determined that I was too shy to succeed in interviews and then placed me in a group that was supposed to teach me interview skills in order to fix that. Well, the group ended up ultimately being a complete waste of time. I honestly think that they put me in the wrong group or just needed an extra member and made an excuse to throw me in to make up the numbers. But that's not really relevant to the story. The other group members didn't do much to help with my shyness either, since they were all men who were at least 4 decades older than me, and obviously didn't share any of my interest. Unfortunately, I ended up gaining the attention of one member that I wanted nothing to do with. I don't actually remember the man's name at this point, but I think it was something generic like John, so that's what I'll call him. John immediately got off on the wrong foot with the rest of the group when he interrupted the instructor during their introduction to the course to complain that him being there was useless since he would be retiring in a few years anyways, and that no one wanted to hire someone who had spent over 10 years in prison. When that didn't get him the reaction he wanted, I assume that the rest of the group thought that he was just attention-seeking, and the instructor had heard similar things before from people who weren't happy about being in the course. He waited until he had been given paperwork to complete, and then turned to the man next to him and loudly explained his prison sentence was for beating his ex-wife, but that she was a lying bitch and he never put a hand on her. She didn't even have any bruises on her at the trial or any evidence of bruises or other injuries before that either, because she was a woman. But because she was a woman, the judge automatically believed her and then sent him to jail. This immediately set me on edge. I'm not an expert when it comes to the law, but I do watch true criminal channels on YouTube, and I have never heard of a sentence of over 10 years for a single beating that supposedly never even happened, that didn't leave any visible injuries. Either John was lying and had severely beaten his wife to the point of putting her in the hospital, or he had been arrested on other charges and was covering up what he actually went to prison for. I immediately decided that I wanted nothing to do with him regardless of which one it was, and that I would avoid interacting with him as much as possible, outside of the polite hellos and passing him things if he asked. Like I said before, I didn't really interact much without the other members of the group at all because of their ages. I attended the first half of the meeting in the morning, and I spent the dinner break in the library while the men all snuck off to the pub and then went home immediately after the second half was over. No one has ever asked me how I spent my breaks, and since the pub and the library were in the opposite directions from each other and couldn't be seen from the front of the building the group met in, because of the way the streets were arranged, there should have been no way for any of them to know where I had been, which made what happened next even more worrying. About halfway through the course, there was a day where I had bumped into a friend on my dinner break, and I decided to put off visiting the library until the course was over for the day, just to catch up with them instead. When I did get around to it, I spent at least quarter of an hour there before heading to the desk to check out my books, and I ended up being drawn into a conversation by the librarian who had noticed that I was checking out books related to a franchise that he also enjoyed, and that was getting a new movie the next year. There were only a handful of other people in the library, so I didn't see anything wrong with talking to a friendly man around my age who shared my interest after 8 hours of boredom and paperwork. We had been talking for another quarter of an hour when he suddenly glanced over my shoulder, kinda looking confused and concerned, and was just opening his mouth to say something when someone grabbed me by my shoulders. My friends and family know that I hate having my shoulders touched without warning and would never have done that to me. So I immediately knew that whoever was touching me was a stranger, and I knocked their hands away while turning around and backing up into the librarian's desk. It was John. He was standing directly behind me with a huge smile on his face, and as soon as I turned around, he made a joke about knowing he would find me there and how I practically lived there before chattering at me as if we were close friends. I was just completely confused. It was obvious that he hadn't just coincidentally bumped into me from the way he was talking, but John had been kept behind while the group was heading out because he had filled out his paperwork incorrectly, and as I mentioned before, you can't see the library from the building, so he shouldn't have had any way of seeing where I had gone. It had also been half an hour since I left the building, so if he had left not long after me and just seen me go in while we were walking in the same direction, he would have come inside by then. The only way it made sense for him to know to look for me there and joke that I practically live there would be if he had somehow learned that I was going to the library during dinner breaks, known that I hadn't that day, and guessed that I would go after the meeting instead. What made that even stranger than it already was is the fact that John had never shown any interest in me during the group sessions and mostly ignored me the way I ignored him unless we were forced to interact for whatever reason. So, why was he now following me into other buildings to start conversations out of nowhere and acting like we were close? While John was still talking, the librarian leaned in to ask if I knew the man because he had obviously seen my negative reaction to being touched by John, and when I briefly explained the situation to him, he asked John politely to please leave me alone or leave the building. John refused and tried to tell the man that we were friends, completely ignoring the fact that I had just said that we weren't and how ridiculous it would be to claim an 18-year-old girl and a 50-something or 60-something-year-old man were friends in the first place. When the librarian asked again and outright told him that harassing other customers wasn't acceptable and he would be removed from the building if he refused to leave me alone, John smiled and agreed to leave in a tone that you use when you're humoring a child before walking out and very obviously stationing himself right outside the doors, waiting for me to leave too. The librarian was clearly concerned by this and asked for the full story of what was going on, and I told him, including my suspicions that John had been following me around without my knowledge to know that I would be there in the first place. He suggested that I should stay in the library until his break so he could walk me to my bus stop to make sure that John left me alone, but it would be several hours, and if I had waited, I wouldn't have gotten home in time to change and head to another meeting that I had later that evening. So, he asked me to at least come in the next time I was there to let him know that I was safe, and reluctantly watched me leave. John immediately stepped into my personal space when I got outside, jokingly asking what the librarian's problem was, and still acting like we were friends. I tried to walk around him without answering him and head to the bus station to go home, but he grabbed me by my arm and reminded me that there was a closer stop for our bus. When I told him that we aren't getting the same bus because I had never seen him on the same one as me, he corrected me and said that we both needed the number blank bus and told me where he lived, which was in fact on the same bus route as me. Although I was still tempted to walk away and go to the station instead, and possibly sneakily get on a different bus and just walk the rest of the walk home, it was very clear that he was going to follow me if I did, because he still had a hold of my arm, refusing to let go when I tried to pull away. There were several dark alleys on the way that I had no intention of going anywhere near while in his company. When I agreed to go to the closer bus stop, he let go of me and started walking at my side, chattering like we were good friends again. John kept walking when we reached the stop, which was odd, but I was hoping that my lack of response to anything he said had made him give up and decide to leave me alone, or that he had mixed up the bus stop with one further along and I could run while his back was turned. Well, no luck, but as soon as he realized that I wasn't following him anymore, John came back, frowning as if he was confused and asking me, "I thought we were going for coffee together." Shocked, I told him bluntly no. He kept pushing, trying to convince me that I had agreed to go with him, and when that didn't work, he switched tactics and claimed that I had mentioned while leaving the classroom that I wanted some coffee, so he thought that we could go together. That was an obvious lie too, since I don't drink coffee and I told him so. John's only answer was to say that I didn't have to get coffee and kept pushing me to go to a cafe with him. I firmly told him no, and apparently he took that as me not wanting to drink in public because he attempted to invite me to his flat. If that wasn't weird enough, he started telling me that if there was a naked girl on the couch when we get there, I'm not to worry because that's just his 18-year-old daughter. Because an 18-year-old daughter is definitely going to lounge around naked on her father's furniture in front of him, right? Other people at the stop were staring at us, and I took the opportunity to point out that I was also 18 and firmly tell John that I don't want to go to his flat with him and to leave me alone. He completely ignored the last part and tried to claim that I was lying about my age and that I was at least 29, when most people at that time still mistook me for being in my early teens at first glance. The bus arrived at that moment, and I got on as quickly as possible, thinking that I would be safe there and the driver would throw him off if need be. Well, no. When I sat in an aisle seat to stop John from sitting next to me, he physically shoved me across the seat, pitting me in against the window to the point that I could barely move, and pressing his knees up against the seat in front of him to make sure that I had no room to get past him unless he allowed it. The only way for me to get out would have involved me straddling his lap since the seats in front of us were occupied. I loudly told him to move and to leave me alone, but he ignored me, and then he continued trying to convince me to come to his flat. And although a few people gave me uncomfortable looks, when I tried to make eye contact with some of the men in the hopes that they would help me, they would look away as if they hadn't noticed or suddenly become very interested in their phones. I spent the ride huddled against the window, trying to touch him as little as possible, and was ignored again when I shouted at him to stop touching me because he kept putting his hand on my thigh and as high up as he could get without directly groping me. No one did anything about it, but he stopped touching me after that. He had apparently also given up on convincing me to go to his flat that day, but when we were coming up to the apartment block, he pointed it out to me. Physically turning my face when I refused to look, told me his apartment number, and tried to give me a kiss goodbye on the cheek. And when I dodged, before getting off the bus and knocking on the opposite window to try and get my attention so he could wave at me. When the bus set off again, several people started loudly talking about how disgusting he was and that men like him should be reported, while refusing to look in my direction where I was sat shaking and seething in my seat. And other than an awkward, so are you alright? From the driver, just as I was about to step off the bus, no one bothered to check on me. As soon as I got home, I sent an email to the instructor telling her that I wanted to switch groups and never see that man again, explaining what he had done to me. She read it, but ignored it for an entire week until I sent a follow-up threatening to get the police involved if they forced me to interact with this man again. And their solution was to tell me that I could leave the course early instead, essentially kicking me out as if I was the problem. I bumped into the man not long afterwards, and he tried to ask me why I hadn't been attending the group anymore, admitting that he had asked the instructor and they refused to tell him. But I managed to get away and lose him in the crowd. I've seen him a few times in passing in the years since, but fortunately, he has never noticed me or approached me again. And I hope that it stays that way. So recently, I had a few encounters with a delivery guy. The first thing he asked me was, "Are you," my full name, "from my previous address? You moved, huh?" While smiling creepily, I thought he was just a delivery guy that was trying to do small talk, so I just brushed him off. I am living alone, so I thought I was just being overthinking by getting creeped out. Then I realized after I thought about it that he was my neighbor in my previous address. He struck up a conversation with me, saying that he knows one of my friends. I don't really like talking to strangers, so I didn't talk with him long, but it stayed with me because I felt uncomfortable with him, like I felt that he was dangerous. After that, I was going out and I saw him again delivering to my neighbor, and I ignored him trying to walk by. He saw me and then recognized me even after I was wearing a mask, and he asked me the same question again. After that, since I don't go out much, I don't see him as often. There was this one time that he was standing in front of my neighbor's house, but I just walked by. Then, I saw him in my Facebook friend request, and I just ignored him again, but I was obviously creeped out, so I told my friend that he said he knew. At first, my friend said that she doesn't know anyone with that name, but his last name made her recognize him as a son of a family friend. They never really talked. His family didn't know he was working as a delivery guy, and he was laid off because he became obsessed with his boss, which was older than his mom. I also lost my keys, so I asked my landlord for replacement. I didn't think much of it until I got home to my door open. Obviously, I was cautious, but there was no one at my apartment, so I sighed in relief thinking maybe I left it open. I work nights, so sometimes my mind is all over the place. But now that I am thinking about it, I overlooked a lot of things, and I am thinking of installing a CCTV in front of my apartment. I am still scared though because he knows my address. Update. My friend told me to report him to the police, but I'm too scared because they might just let him go and he'll take revenge on me. She also told me that he might be doing drugs as sold by his family since he is acting suspicious. The most that I can do right now is just to change my locks and install a CCTV in front. Please wish me luck, guys. Another update. Thank you. I am overwhelmed by you guys worrying about me. So far, I haven't encountered him anymore, though I don't really go out much, and I also set my delivery name to my boyfriend's. Maybe because his family knew and talked to him, I haven't caught anything strange around my house too. I think I am in a safe zone now, and I am going to move to a different city a few months after this, probably with my dog. About 3 years ago, when I was 18, I worked as a waiter in a restaurant in the mall. I am very introverted, but it never affected my relationship with my customers. But speaking to people that I wasn't serving gave me major butterflies. I had just finished my shift at around 5 p.m. and I was walking out when I noticed a woman who looked in pain, holding her stomach and was looking at me. I had to walk past her to get to the exit, and I was trying to avoid her because I was not looking for conversation, and I hated when people ask for money. I know, it's very selfish, but I work really hard for the little money that the customers tip me that day. I maneuvered my way around the people, but she called out to me. I acted like I didn't hear her, and I moved faster. But eventually, she ran to me and grabbed my arm crying. Please Please, brother, I got children and I got cancer of the tummy." And she lifted up her dirty shirt and showed me a large surgery wound across her stomach. I told her that I didn't have anything, but she continued to badger me. Eventually, I just ran to the stairs and I went upstairs and I saw her chasing, but I was way more faster. She slowed down at the second case to catch her breath, and I turned in to get off at the third floor where she could not see me. I then took the elevator next to the stairs back to the first floor so I could get to the exit. Eventually, I got to the bus stop and I was on my way home. When I got off at my stop, I went to the corner shop to get a bread, but at the end of the road, I saw the woman from the mall and her boyfriend. They must have definitely seen me, even though I made an effort to take a longer way home so they wouldn't have seen me. At around 7 o'clock, I get a knock at my gate. I live in a house that has 2 slide gates in front of the main entrance. I looked out of the window, and to my horror, I saw the woman and her boyfriend. I stayed quiet and I hoped that they would just go away, but they stayed outside of my house for 2 hours until my parents arrived. They begged my parents for money or food to feed their kids, and my father found it weird that they were there at 9 p.m., so he told them that we didn't have any and to get away from the house before they called the police. And surprisingly, they left without any hassle. I told my parents that these people were begging me for my money at the mall and that they followed me home and stayed outside the house for 2 hours. Luckily, we never saw them again after that day.
This is a long story, but it was so bizarre I feel like it's worth telling. I wanted to post it because this person recently tried to friend my now husband on Facebook. It brought back crazy memories, and I need to vent about it. I got married right at 18. I was a pretty book-smart kid, but lacked street smarts. And by the time I turned 20, my now ex-husband and I had moved onto a rental property in a pretty nice suburb area. In the basement of the house, there was a big mother-in-law suite, where a good male friend of ours lived as well. I was about halfway through nursing school at this time. This particular semester of nursing school, I had a very early clinical rotation once a week. I was 21 at the time. I'm not a morning person, so in order to maximize the amount of time I spent asleep, I started loading all my stuff into my car the night before. My bags, my books, and even my purse. One particular night before clinicals, I asked my ex-husband Bobby to get a book for my car. He goes out and does, but forgets to lock the door. The next morning when I get to my car, I note that my purse is now gone. So I end up filing a police report. I was mostly concerned because I had just gotten this new job as a nurse's aide at a hospital. I had my security card still sitting in my wallet. Almost immediately after that theft, strange things start to happen. We start getting ding-dong ditches at all hours of the day and night. Someone vandalized mine, Nick's, and Bob's cars with strange graffiti. Our house would be egged. Nick's tires got slashed. First, we chalked it up to neighborhood pranksters. But when we started having damages that cost me some decent money, we called the police. Not to mention one day when Bob was mowing the lawn, he noticed piles of cigarette butts outside the bedroom window. The police came out and pretty much did nothing but take a report and told us to probably invest in car alarms and some brighter floodlights for the driveway. A few weeks after this, at 2:30 in the morning, I get a call on my cell. It was the police in a neighboring town. They had picked up someone who had my ID on him, someone named Craig. When they asked why he had someone else's ID on him, he claimed that I was his girlfriend. The cop called me because his name had popped up that I'd file a police report for theft. I assured the police that I'd never heard of him before, and was also told that I could pick up my ID at the police station within the next few days. Things really started to escalate at that point, but I still didn't make the connection that perhaps these incidents were related. I began to get strange messages on MySpace. This was 2009, as well as on Facebook. clearly from fake accounts with long-winded messages that made absolutely no sense. This person started messaging friends of mine as well. I deleted MySpace and blocked the person on Facebook, but new accounts kept getting created more and more. Somehow this person got my email address, started sending me emails as well. I had no idea who this person can be. They seemed to know details about me that indicated that this was either someone I knew or knew someone that I knew. Messages weren't overtly threatening, but creepy enough to where I started becoming very uncomfortable. One night, my friend Lauren and I were sitting on the couch watching TV. Lauren's husband and a few other friends had gone out for the night. We were sitting around chilling when we hear something that sounds like someone shaking the garage door. We go out and check it. Nothing seems out of the ordinary. We've had occasional issues with raccoons, so I just chalked it up to that. But the noise keeps continuing. Lauren and I are getting freaked out at this point. Now understand the layout of the house. It was a modern style ranch house with no upstairs. The garage sounds moved now to the kitchen window. A distinct sound of someone scratching or knocking hard. We immediately call our husbands, who don't answer. And at this point, we debate calling the police. What if it is an animal or just tree branches? We don't want to seem stupid. As we debate this, I see Lauren's face go sheet white and look past me. I spin around and I can see the handle to our front door wiggling. We were seated near the kitchen, so we jump up. Lauren grabs a knife from the butcher block on the counter and I grab a small hammer from the trunk drawer. We book it to the back of the house where the bedrooms are, cell phone in hand, and lock the door behind us, and immediately call the police. The dispatcher tells us to stay on the line, move furniture in front of the door if possible. Police are on their way. We shove a dresser in front of the door, continuing with our knife and hammer in hands. And we agreed if he was going to come in, he might be bigger or stronger than us, but we're not going down without a fight. The cops finally show up, banging on the front door, shouting police. We can see the red and blue lights through the window. We leave the room and let the cops inside. They find no signs of anyone present or evidence of any attempted break-in. They take another report, and in the meanwhile, our husbands finally call us back, and they come home when the cops leave. Fast forward a few months later, a very close friend of ours, Sean, was renovating his apartment and needed a place to crash along with his girlfriend. Bob and I decided that he could stay in the third bedroom inside our house. The first night that Sean stayed with us, we're awakened at 2 a.m. by Sean screaming at someone. Bob and I jump out of bed and rush into the hall and into Sean's room. Sean and his girlfriend are wide awake, lights on, looking totally freaked out. The screen is sliced and flopping in the wind. Sean told us that he woke up to someone using what he thought was a knife on the screen and started climbing in through that window. We call the cops again. They come out and take a statement. Sean describes the guy as best as he could. White male, young looking, semi-shaved head with what looked like darker hair. The police dust for fingerprints and comes back as a match for, you guessed it, Craig J. Turns out I knew who he was, vaguely. He was a year younger than me. We'd gone to the same high school, but I couldn't remember having any significant interactions with him. He lived with his parents, only a few blocks away from my parents' house. Upon realizing that Sean had just moved in, the cop makes a statement that chilled us all. He probably didn't realize anyone was staying in this bedroom and thought the room would be empty. So the cops go there and arrest him. And he suddenly has quite the story for him. Him and I are secret lovers, and I was ignoring him. We had a relationship. He also had, quote unquote, been allowed into my home many times. I'm floored. He gets charged with something like trespassing or breaking and entering, and does light time for it, maybe a month tops, then has to pay a fine. In the meanwhile, I get a restraining order on him. When he gets out, I hear nothing from him. I also develop a completely irrational fear of first floor windows. Fast forward to Christmas of 2010. I'm now 23. I figured the whole Craig thing is in the past. Bob and I ended up divorcing, which was unrelated to this, and go our separate ways. And Nick has long since moved out. We end our lease, and I moved to a less desirable suburb, but with a more affordable rent. I settle on an apartment in a 4-unit building that has a locked entrance, and the only way in was with a key or with someone opening the door from the inside. I lived on the 2nd floor. By this time, I graduated and was now a nurse, was working full-time at a nursing home. Spring, summer of 2011, it all started up again. Calls began coming to me at work, only to have that someone hang up. Letters suddenly appeared in the staff-only mailbox, mailed to me with no return address. Strange emails started up again from random accounts. The messages were never overtly threatening, but they were long and way too frequent and way too out there. He spoke to me as if we were long-lost friends and had some sort of connection. I don't think he ever threatened to hurt me, although cutting into the house with a knife, I really don't know what was going on through his head. What I kind of seemed to piece together over the years from all this rambling is he had some sort of crush on me when I was younger. And him happening to rob my car was some sort of sign from the universe or something that we were meant to be together. I call the police, and they basically tell me there's nothing they can do because there's been no threats. There's not much else they can do other than watch and wait. This continues on for a while, and finally, one night I wake up at 2 a.m. to the doorbell ringing. I'm instantly in a panic. I look out the window. There, illuminated in the floodlight, is Craig. I burst out crying in my half-awake state. I run across the hall and start banging on my neighbor's door. He was an older divorced guy who lived alone. He goes downstairs and confronts Craig, tells him the cops have been called, and Craig immediately takes off. I file a report, and they claim they will talk to him, but this only makes things get worse. Friends I have on Facebook are now starting to get random messages from him, asking about me, telling them that he has an important information for me. Other times, he alternates saying that I owe him money and I have debt I need to pay off. My friends block him as he goes along. Meanwhile, my younger sister is living in the city with a few friends. He somehow finds out where and drives to her apartment and confronts her while she has people over. She freaks out. They kick him out and she calls the police, who basically do the same thing again. He didn't commit a crime, but offered to tell her to get a restraining order. Right after this, another incident occurs. My younger cousin is a high school senior on the cross-country team. He shows up at my cousin's practice. My cousin has no clue who he is, and he starts demanding information about me. The coach ended up getting involved, and Craig gets in a fight with him. The police are called, and he's banned from school grounds, but nothing more. He calls the nursing home administrator at my job, asking him to talk to me, and that he has important information to tell me. The administrator, who is fully aware of the situation, tells him not to come onto the property or he'll have him arrested for trespassing. At this point, I'm paranoid beyond measure, but then just as quickly as it started, it faded away. It's now summer of 2012. This is the final capper in this saga. I'm almost 25 now. A friend of mine named Stacy moves in with me temporarily while she looked for a place. She was dating a new guy and spent quite a few nights at his place. One day I picked up a double shift starting at 7 a.m. and ended at 11:30 p.m. Stacy texts me around 3:30 p.m. stating that she won't be home that night and was going out with her guy. I arrive home that night at almost midnight. The first thing I notice is that my door is unlocked. Uneasy, but thinking perhaps Stacy had just forgotten to lock it, cautiously peer inside. I pan my gaze into the kitchen and living room. I can't shake the feeling that I'm unsettled. Something wasn't sitting right with me. Due to all of these incidents, I've made sure that only 1 or 2 lights were on even when I wasn't home. I was still not fully in the door when I noticed that I was staring into the pitch black apartment, and immediately, my brain went into full panic mode. I'm glad it did though. Realistically, Stacy could have forgotten to leave a light on, but my instincts were in overdrive and sounding off at least 5 alarm bells in my head. My Puerto Rican neighbor who lived down in the apartment units below me was known for his weekend parties, and I could hear one going on downstairs. I book it down the stairs and burst into the party and tell him what had just happened. He looks at me like I'm crazy, but agrees to come upstairs with me. We get inside and he looks around and we don't see anyone. I'm starting to wonder if maybe I am just nuts. Maybe Stacy had her boyfriend over and they left in a hurry, forgetting to turn on the low lights and lock the door. He agrees with me and sort of jokingly pulls open the pantry door. What I saw next will never leave my mind. There, crouched inside my pantry, is Craig. My neighbor puts the guy in a chokehold, and I call the police. To this day, I have no idea what he planned on doing next, but the cops came out and he's arrested. Because my neighbor was having a party, he had the door open to the alleyway, and chances are, he just walked into our building. And most likely, people just assumed that he was there for the party or whatever. It's more confusing how he got into my apartment itself, and my theory is, my roommate at the time was from the country, while I lived in a suburb, so we always locked our doors and generally kept everything secure as a rule. She was used to leaving her doors unlocked and wide open, and I think honestly, it may have just slipped her mind when she went out the door for the night. I confronted her about it and she of course denied it. But that's really the only logical way he could have gotten inside. I always locked both the knob lock and the deadbolt whenever I left the house. Unless he was a skilled locksmith, I have no idea how else he could have gotten in. I didn't stay alone or go anywhere by myself for a long time after that. I feel like I may have actually developed a paranoia because of all of this, and was highly suspicious of giving my number or any information to anyone. He ended up being charged and convicted of aggravated stalking, breaking and entering, and some other charges. I ended up meeting his parents in court, who were both shockingly very normal and apologetic people. They tried explaining their son's behavior. They claimed he was mentally ill and suffered from bipolar disorder. When he's medicated, he's okay, but when he's off his meds, he's nuts. After he served time, I didn't hear from him for years, until 2016 when he found me on Facebook. I was much older now, around 29. I replied to him very firmly that any contact with me would end up in the police being called. I had no interest in him whatsoever. I blocked him instantly. Recently, he found my new husband on Facebook and friended him. My husband blocked him as well. To this day, I'm still paranoid. I had parked my car near a baseball diamond once, and some kid most likely hit a baseball into my windshield and took off because I had a perfectly baseball-sized spider crack on the glass. Despite it being completely logical that it most likely was, I instantly reverted back to, oh God, is it him? I have no idea what actually happened to him. I'm also now a total psycho about keeping things locked. I do have one of my acquaintances monitor him on Facebook, and from what I've seen, he appears to go through periods where he's pretty inactive, and then immediately have episodes where he's just rambling, overposting and oversharing, and acting generally deranged. I do believe his parents were telling the truth when they stated that when he's medicated, he's okay. Part of me does feel bad for him. I'm older now, been a nurse for almost 10 years, and some of which was time spent with a psych specialty. The mind is a hell of a thing. Looking back though, those were some of the worst years of my adult life. He put me through a lot of anxiety, and caused a lot of issues for me. I slept on my couch pushed against my apartment door for 2 years before I moved out of there. I'm now married, but on nights where I'm home alone, I still find myself resisting the urge to stack furniture in front of my doors. Moral of the story, never leave your purse in your car, and always lock your doors.
And here's the riddle for this video. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. But I would also like to thank my amazing patrons, my top tippers, and my dearest channel members. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it with all of my heart. If you want to support the channel further, you could also choose to become a patron, a tipper, or a channel member. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. I would also like to announce that we have merch now. The link is in the description of the video, along with all my other social media links, like my Discord server, Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.